The confetti was still falling when the Seattle Seahawks did something that had the rest of the National Football League quietly terrified. Most teams spend the moments after a Super Bowl celebrating, making the rounds, soaking in the glory. Seattle did something else. They moved, quietly, deliberately. And the move they made wasn't a flashy trade or a headline-grabbing free agent signing. It was something far more dangerous. They locked in the future of their franchise before anyone even realized the window was closing. The same people who spent years doubting Sam Darnold suddenly had to accept that he wasn't just a comeback story. He was the quarterback who dragged an entire city to a championship. And right when everyone thought the celebration would last all offseason, the Seahawks front office shifted the conversation from what they just did to what they are about to do next. Here is what nobody saw coming. While the rest of the league was busy circling Seattle's roster like sharks waiting for the pieces to scatter, Sam Darnold was sitting on a 3-year, $100 million deal with a front office that publicly said they want him for the long haul. And Jackson Smith-Njigba, the 24-year-old who just led the entire league in receiving yards and walked away with Offensive Player of the Year, quietly signed a contract that made him the richest receiver in the history of the sport. 4 years. $168.6 million, $120 million of it guaranteed. That is not a team resting on a championship. That is a team planting a flag and daring anybody to try and take their spot. The moment the Lombardi Trophy touched down in Seattle, most people expected the roster to get picked apart. Instead, the Seahawks made sure the two most important pieces on offense are not going anywhere for years. But the part that should have every other contender in the National Football Conference losing sleep has nothing to do with the players they kept. It has everything to do with the players they let walk and the way they did it. John Schneider watched 4 key contributors sign massive deals elsewhere. Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl most valuable player, left for Kansas City. Boy Mayfield took $60 million from Cincinnati. Kobe Bryant and Rick Woolen followed the money to Chicago and Philadelphia. From the outside, it looked like a championship team crumbling before the trophy even got dusty. But what Schneider understood, and what the national media keeps missing, is that winning a Super Bowl turns your salary cap into your biggest enemy. The teams that try to keep everyone end up handcuffed for years. Seattle did the exact opposite. They let the market overpay the pieces they could replace, kept over $32 million in cap space, and quietly walked away with a roster that somehow looks even more dangerous than the one that just won it all. And now, the real story begins. There is a difference between a quarterback who wins and a quarterback who finds a home. Sam Darnold spent years being talked about like a player who had run out of chances. People looked at his numbers, they looked at the teams he played for, and they made their minds up before they ever really watched him play. Then Seattle happened. And suddenly, the same guy who could not get out of his own way in New York and Carolina was leading a 14-win season, throwing for 4,048 yards and doing something only one other quarterback in the history of the National Football League had ever done. He became the second player to lead 2 different teams to 14-win seasons in back-to-back years. That is not a fluke. That is not a system quarterback. That is a man who finally stopped trying to prove everybody wrong and started proving himself right. The postseason is where the real story unfolded, though. Sam Darnold went into the playoffs with a label that had followed him his entire career. Turnover prone, prone to mistakes when the lights got bright. And what did he do? He flipped the switch when it mattered more than any other moment in his life. 0 turnovers across the entire postseason. Every game, every drive, every pressure situation. He did not give the ball away once on the way to a Super Bowl. The same guy who led the league in turnovers during the regular season turned into the most careful, most confident version of himself the moment the stakes could not get any higher. 29-13 against New England in the biggest game of the year. And when the confetti fell, nobody was talking about what he used to be. They were talking about what he had become. Now here is the part that should make the rest of the National Football Conference uncomfortable. Sam Darnold is not going anywhere. Seattle locked him into a 3-year, $100 million deal with a front office that stood in front of cameras and said they want him as their quarterback for a long time. Not a bridge, not a placeholder. The guy everybody doubted for years is now the foundation of a team that just won a championship. And the confidence he built this season did not disappear when the trophy got handed out. It is still there. It is the reason he walked off that field and immediately started talking about running it back. The question is not whether he can do it again. The question is whether the rest of the league is ready for a version of Sam Darnold who finally knows exactly who he is. While the quarterback got all the attention, Seattle's front office was quietly making a decision that will shape this franchise for the next half-decade. 5 days after the Super Bowl, Jackson Smith-Njigba signed a 4-year extension worth $168.6 million with $120 million guaranteed, the richest receiver contract in the history of the National Football League. Some people looked at that number and wondered how a receiver could command that kind of money at 24 years old. Then they looked at what he actually did last season. Jackson Smith-Njigba led the entire league with 1,793 receiving yards. He earned first-team All-Pro. He won Offensive Player of the Year. And when his team needed him most, he caught the passes that brought a Lombardi Trophy back to Seattle. That is not a player you pay because you have to. That is a player you pay because you cannot afford to let anybody else have him. The timing of this extension matters just as much as the numbers do. Most teams coming off a Super Bowl spend the offseason trying to keep their core together while everybody else tries to pick them apart. Seattle did not wait for the bidding war to start. They did not let Jackson Smith-Njigba test the market or hear offers from other teams. They walked up to their 24-year-old superstar and told him he was the future before anybody else could even pick up the phone. And his response told you everything you need to know about the culture they are building. He stood in front of reporters after signing and said, "The only thing better than one Super Bowl is 2. That kind of confidence does not come from a contract. It comes from a player who knows he is exactly where he belongs. But the real beauty of this move is what it does for the rest of the roster. Seattle just locked up their franchise quarterback and their franchise receiver while still keeping Cooper Kupp on a team-friendly deal at $13.5 million. Jackson Smith-Njigba is now locked in through 2031. Sam Darnold is locked in through 2028. The two most important pieces on offense are not going anywhere. And while the rest of the division spent their offseason trying to catch up, Seattle quietly made sure their foundation was stronger than anybody realized. The money is spent, the future is secured, and the only thing left to figure out is how many more trophies this core can bring back to the Pacific Northwest. Here's where the narrative gets twisted. The moment the confetti stopped falling, every team in the league started circling Seattle's roster like sharks waiting for the feast, and they got exactly what they came for. Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl most valuable player, signed with Kansas City for 3 years and up to $45 million. Boy Mafe took 3 years and $60 million from Cincinnati. Kobe Bryant left for Chicago on a 3-year, $40 million deal. Rick Woolen signed a 1-year contract with Philadelphia worth $12 million. 4 real contributors. 4 significant paychecks. Gone in a matter of days. From the outside looking in, that looks like a championship team falling apart before the trophy even gets dusty. But that is exactly what John Schneider wanted people to believe. There is a method to this madness that most fans and even some media members miss every single offseason. When you win a Super Bowl, the salary cap becomes your biggest opponent. Every player on your roster suddenly has leverage. Every agent is asking for top dollar. And if you try to keep everybody, you end up handcuffed for 3 or 4 years with no flexibility to build forward. John Schneider has been doing this longer than most general managers in the league. He made a calculated decision. He identified who was foundational and who was replaceable at the right price. That is not cold. That is smart roster management from a general manager who has done this at an elite level for over a decade. He let the market overpay his guys and kept his powder dry for the moves that actually matter. The proof is sitting right there in the numbers. Seattle still has over $32 million in cap space heading into the draft. They still have the 8th most cap room in the entire National Football League, even after giving Jackson Smith-Njigba his record-breaking extension. John Schneider did not panic. He did not chase nostalgia. He watched 4 key contributors walk out the door and did not flinch because he knew exactly what he was doing. The players he chose to keep over the ones who left might end up being the most underrated decisions of this entire offseason. And while everybody was busy counting the names that got away, Seattle was quietly building something that looks a lot more sustainable than the team that just won a championship. Start with Rashid Shaheed, because this is the one that made people do a double take. 3 years, $51 million for a receiver who only arrived mid-season through a trade from New Orleans. Sounds wild until you remember what he actually did. 3 kick and punt return touchdowns in half a season, including one that directly helped Seattle lock up the #1 seed in the National Football Conference. His deep speed stretches every defense the moment he steps on the field. You cannot replace that kind of explosive ability on a roster that already has elite pass catchers. John Schneider saw the value, and he made sure Rashid Shaheed stayed in Seattle before anyone else could even pick up the phone. That is not a luxury signing. That is a necessity dressed up like a luxury. Then there is Josh Jobe. 3 years, $24 million. $8 million a year for a cornerback who started 15 of 16 regular season games, recorded 12 passes defensed, an interception, and then started all 3 postseason games on the way to a championship. He was splitting time with Rick Woolen last year and honestly outplayed him down the stretch. At $8 million per season compared to $12 million for Rick Woolen on a 1-year deal in Philadelphia, this is the kind of value signing that wins you repeat titles. Quiet, smart, exactly what a defending champion needs. Josh Jobe is not a household name, but he is exactly the kind of player who makes a defense work without anybody noticing until he is gone. But the depth moves are what separate good front offices from great ones. Drake Thomas got locked up on a multi-year deal after breaking out as a starter with 89 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. Josh Jones came back to protect the offensive line. A Brady Russell returned as one of the best special teams players on the roster. Emmanuel Wilson was signed from Green Bay as a running back who flashed real talent whenever he got touches. None of these names generate headlines. Every single one of them wins football games. While the rest of the league was busy chasing big names, John Schneider was quietly making sure the engine of this team did not get stripped for parts. And now Seattle heads into the draft with a roster that looks deeper than anybody wants to admit. Losing your offensive coordinator after a Super Bowl is supposed to hurt. Clint Kubiak left to become the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. He took quarterbacks coach Andrew Janocko with him. That is your offensive coordinator and your quarterback coach gone in the same offseason after winning a championship. Most teams would panic. Most teams would scramble to find somebody who could keep the system intact without losing momentum. Mike Macdonald did not even flinch. He went straight to San Francisco and hired Brian Fleury, the man who served as run game coordinator and tight ends coach under Kyle Shanahan for the last 7 seasons. Seattle literally pulled one of the sharpest offensive minds in football from a division rival's building, and the 49ers could do nothing about it. Brian Fleury is not some unknown gamble. He worked directly with Christian McCaffrey during a season where McCaffrey put up over 2,100 yards from scrimmage. He coached George Kittle for years. He knows the Shanahan system inside and out because he helped build pieces of it. And the best part is that Clint Kubiak's offense in Seattle was already rooted in that same system. So the transition is almost seamless. Brian Fleury said it himself. His goal is to maintain what Kubiak installed while adding layers that he developed in San Francisco. The Seahawks finished 3rd in scoring offense last season, averaging 28.4 points per game. Brian Fleury does not need to reinvent anything. He just needs to refine it. What makes this hire even more interesting is the style of offense Brian Fleury wants to run. He believes in using 2 to 3 running backs consistently, keeping legs fresh throughout the season. He wants to be aggressive from a tempo standpoint and put constant pressure on defenses both schematically and physically. That philosophy is going to matter a lot when you look at how the rest of the National Football Conference West spent their offseason trying to catch up to Seattle. The 49ers had to watch one of their own walk across the division to a team that just won a Super Bowl. And the only thing they could do was sit there and hope it does not come back to haunt them twice a year for the foreseeable future. The San Francisco 49ers signed Mike Evans on a 3-year, $42 million deal. That sounds great on paper until you realize Mike Evans has been dealing with injuries for 2 consecutive seasons. A receiver who once had 11 straight 1,000-yard seasons is now fighting to stay on the field consistently. They also added Christian Kirk, a player who has not been fully effective or healthy for 3 straight years. Meanwhile, the Trent Williams situation is a ticking time bomb. San Francisco wants to lower his $37 million cap hit, but he has zero incentive to take less money. If they cannot work out a new deal, a trade or release becomes a real possibility. Losing a franchise left tackle in the middle of a window is not ideal for any team trying to compete. On top of that, the 49ers lost Jauan Jennings after bringing in Mike Evans. And honestly, at this stage of their careers, Jauan Jennings might have been the more reliable option. They brought back Dre Greenlaw, but he is past his best years. None of the other additions they made truly moved the needle in a meaningful way. This is a team that is treading water, trying to stay relevant while their core slowly ages out of its prime. The pieces they added are names, not solutions. And the team sitting at the top of this division knows it. Now look at the Los Angeles Rams. They spent significant money and draft capital to bring in Jalen Watson, but then somehow let Roger McCreary walk for just $1.4 million after trading for him at the deadline last year. That is a baffling decision for a team trying to close the gap on a Super Bowl champion. Neither of these rosters got meaningfully better this offseason. And Jackson Smith-Njigba had no problem calling both of them out publicly. He showed up at a UFC promotion recently and looked straight at the camera and said he would happily get in the ring with anyone from the Los Angeles Rams or the San Francisco 49ers. No hesitation, no filter. That is the energy of a 24-year-old who just proved he is the best receiver in football and knows exactly where his team stands in this division. Seattle holds pick 32 in the first round and pick 64 in the second. Only 4 total picks in this draft after trading selections away for Rashid Shaheed last season. That is a light haul for a general manager who loves to stockpile picks. But what if those 2 selections alone completely transform the roster? The latest 2-round mock draft gave the Seahawks a dream scenario that would make every fan in the Pacific Northwest lose their mind. At pick 32, Avon Terrell, the cornerback out of Clemson. This kid forced 5 fumbles in the 2025 season alone, held opposing quarterbacks to barely over a 50% completion rate against him, and can play outside or in the slot. Some mocks have him going as early as the late teens. Getting a talent like that at 32 would be a steal. At pick 64, Jadarian Price, the running back from Notre Dame who played behind Jeremiah Love. He is physical, fast, and capable of breaking away in open space. Exactly the kind of runner Brian Fleury wants in his system. There is also the possibility that John Schneider trades back from 32 entirely. Quarterback Ty Simpson is generating serious buzz as a potential first-round pick, and teams desperate for a signal caller might be willing to trade up to grab him before he falls out of that valuable 5th-year option range. John Schneider has traded back in the first round multiple times throughout his career. This draft could be the perfect setup for another classic move. But there is still one more hole on this roster that needs addressing before the season starts. The pass rush lost its edge when Boy Maffey left for Cincinnati. That is the one gap that still needs a real answer. And the free agent market has some fascinating options sitting right there waiting for a phone call. Cam Jordan is still one of the most complete edge players in the league. Jadeveon Clowney already knows what it feels like to wear a Seahawks jersey. He has played in this system before and could slide right back into the rotation without missing a beat. Then there is Joey Bosa, a name that carries serious weight. Injuries have been an issue, but in a reduced role where Seattle does not need him on the field for every snap, his sack numbers could climb right back to where they were during his prime years. John Schneider has built championship rosters before. He knows exactly how to find that final piece at the perfect price. And if history tells us anything, he already has a name circled on his board. The rest of the National Football Conference is just waiting to see what happens next.